Why? How was your relationship with film growing up? Did you watch a lot of movies?
So yes, I watched far too many movies, and if I'd watched fewer, I might have been, a successful corporate lawyer or something. But when I was studying law firstly, my mother was a great lover of cinema. So lots of misspent days watching great Hollywood greats and all the rest of it. And then when I came to study law at the LSE, I fear I spent too much time at the NFT, as it was. So the rest is history. So that's what went wrong. But maybe not. Maybe
I think
not.
it all went okay.
Well, we'll see.
Yeah.
It's too early to tell.
And what sort of films did you enjoy most when you were growing up and spending all of your precious studying time at the NFT?
Well, I think that my choice slightly reflects something about my general taste in when popular culture is great and on point. It's my view that it has the possibility of reaching way more people than political rhetoric or polemic or even legislation on occasion. And so a movie like the one we're going to discuss and you're going to see, I don't know how many times you've seen it, but I've seen it about half a dozen times. But when a movie can reach lots of people to very, very high artistic standards, but also have some great history or a great message, that's just perfect. You're in for a treat.
So why, when we first reached out to you months and months ago, why did you want to pick Suffragette to screen tonight?
So I had the privilege of seeing Suffragette back in 2015. So before its official release, I was invited to various previews of it. I guess because of its feminist subject matter. And then I went to the premiere and I've seen it subsequently. I showed it to my son, who needs a bit of feminist education, you understand? And I looked at it again after, a fallow period. I looked at it recently in preparation for tonight. And the first thing to say is this is a lovely film. History and politics aside, this is a beautiful piece of cinema. Its cinematic values are lovely. Look at the laundry, right? These are the women of the Glass House Laundry, but of course laundry has been such a part of so many women's lives and continues to be. And my own mother never had a washing machine. So I'm very familiar with a mother who is literally washing her family's clothes by hand. She wasn't a laundress, you understand. And then, of course, we have laundrettes and so on. So, it's cinematically beautiful, and the character development and the narrative I find hugely compelling and moving. Just before you even get into the history and the politics. And then I also believe that that sometimes either historical subjects or at the other end of the scale futuristic sci-fi subjects can actually be the most moving from a political point of view. People will engage with subjects. People will think about the present day sometimes more when they're doing it through the lens of either history or dystopian sci-fi. The Planet of the Apes was obviously all about racial segregation in the US, not about apes.
Do you think that's one of the sort of the hidden powers of cinema as well, to be able to move large amounts of people?
Of course. It was the great artistic medium of the 20th century. It probably remains the great democratic artistic medium that doesn't require tons and tons of education just to be able to engage with it at a human level. And this movie, Suffragette, is a great example of that, because I think it works on so many levels. Absolutely. And there'll be something new to gain from it every time. I challenge any woman or man, for that matter, not to be moved by the characters. And the characters are complex, by the way. And that includes the policeman and the husband and the dodgy politicians. there is complexity in this movie. It's not a black hat, white hat movie. There is real complexity. And the other thing is that, you know, people have been talking about this so-called centenary of votes for women. You appreciate that there's been a bit of right-wing revisionist history going on because all women did not get the vote for another 10 years. And I think too much of the news media suggests that that posh women got the vote 100 years ago because posh women, you know, signed petitions, and the trips to Holloway Prison and the torture has been slightly left out, as has the enormous contribution of working class women. And this movie unashamedly stars a working class character, you know, Maud Watts. To shy away from brutality is not to tell the story, but to dwell on it too long is, you know,
really complex grief.
Who's getting off on this, you know. And I think the balance, I mean, you'll decide for yourselves in a moment, but I think that the balance is incredibly subtly and well struck by Sarah in her direction of this movie. But it is important for people, women and men, today to realise that that vote was not won by asking nicely. That vote was won at enormous sacrifice, by the way, by women and men. And Sarah's movie shows the solidarity of men in the movement, including I forget his name, but Helena Bonham Carter's husband, and others. And so the solidarity of men is there, and the conflict of men, like the policeman Arthur Steed, played brilliantly by Brendan Gleeson, and Maud's ultimately disappointing but complex husband, played by Ben Whishaw. You know, the complexity is there, the solidarity, but also the division is there, and that's great history and great cinema.
And you said that you've seen the film half a dozen times. Has your relationship with it changed since the first time you saw it? Are you seeing new layers to it every time you see it?
I definitely see new layers. So the first time I saw it, a very, very emotional response, which I think is fine for cinema. I think the second or third time I saw it, the surveillance became very, you know, the police were employing surveillance techniques back then in I think the movie begins in, forgive me if I'm wrong, but about 1912. And I think I got another yes from the director there, so.
A resident fact checker.
So today we have, you know, the internet and all that, but they were still developing their attempts at total surveillance back then. So once I'd got over the emotional response to the first viewing, the second viewing, I started looking around. That's what you do when you see a movie many times.
You start looking at the background.
The surveillance, the abuse of police power, the political disappointments, the broken promise, you know, the wider context. And then, of course, I challenge any father or mother not to be enormously challenged by you know, Maud's predicament, which I won't give away.
Thank you. And we have to talk about how relevant this film is, particularly now at this moment, even 3 years later.
Well, I mean, I think it gets more and more relevant because Sarah in this movie was on the right side of history. And she was right. She was on the right side of older history. But of course, this movie was 3 years ago, before Me Too revealed the unstated, unrevealed extent of workplace abuse, for example. So, and even beyond the women's cause, I think I would like anybody who pontificates about moderation versus radicalism, and anyone who condemns radicalisation without understanding where it comes from, I challenge anybody to just watch this movie, because it could be any other cause. Some that we approve of and some that we don't. But it's as well to understand what will turn people to desperate methods. when they have no choice, when they have been humiliated year after year in the workplace, in the home, on the street, in their country, that they are part of but not part of.
Is there any particular moment, now that you've seen it so many times and you rewatched it recently for this event as well, is there one particular scene that strikes you every time?
Well, there are many, actually. There are some scenes between Maud and her son George. There are some fantastic scenes with Maud and the policeman played by Brendan Gleeson. The famous, and we must shout out to Abby Morgan, who is very busy because she's had big success with The Split and so on, but she wrote a fantastic screenplay. And some of the lines, you know, what are you going to do? We're half the human race. You're going to lock us all up. And that is part of a very powerful dynamic between Maud and her interrogator at certain moments in the movie.
Certainly an incredibly powerful and you know, relevant film. I think we need to wrap up in the next couple of minutes, but I would love you to leave the audience with, how would you introduce this film to someone who, you know, you've spoken about it super eloquently, but if people were to take away one thing about this film and shout to all their friends about it and urge them to see it in the cinema, whenever else it's playing on or at home, what would be the one reason people would need to see this film for?
These women go through terrible, terrible circumstances and oppressions, but to me, the heroine in particular, but others, they are not victims. They are heroes, and the magic ingredient is their solidarity. It's an old-fashioned word, but I think in 2018, as opposed to 1912, it's a word that's coming back into fashion.